Well, thank you for coming to the Sports and Society speaker series on the Olympics. Today's subject is the media and the Olympics, and we have two special guests with us today. First, Teresa Walker, here from the Associated Press. She's been the sports bureau chief here in Nashville for going on 30 years.
Well, since 92.
Since 92?
Yeah,
right.
With AP for nearly 30.
That's amazing. And so people all over the world, if they're reading about what's going on with Vanderbilt sports or the Titans or the Predators or the Grizzlies, I know you go to Memphis a lot, or basically any sporting event that's taking place in the state of Tennessee, they're reading Teresa's work all over the world. So really fortunate to have her with us, and I know she's covered several Olympics. And then also Dave Sheinin is here, flew down from Washington, D.C., escaped the snow up there this morning. Dave's a Vanderbilt alum, class of 91, and he's a first person that I ever spoke to when I was coming here to school myself. We both came here on the Fred Russell Grantland Rice Sports Writing Scholarship, and there was a tradition back then of calling the next year's winner, and he was a year older than me, so he told me, welcome to Vandy, and you get to cover soccer when you get here. You know, Dave actually is my connection to Perry Wallace also, which is getting to know Perry changed my life and getting to write a book about him. But Dave's the first person actually that wrote about Perry that I was aware of on campus, and it was his article that I read that got me interested in Perry. So I was very grateful to Dave for that. But Dave's the national baseball writer for the Washington Post and also does a lot of enterprise and feature writing on other subjects for the Post, and has been to at least 3 different Olympics.
3 Olympics,
right? In Russia, China, and Brazil. Yes. Teresa, you've been Atlanta, Brazil.
Vancouver, London, and Korea.
Amazing. So we're going to hear about what it's like to be a journalist covering the Olympics. I guess first question is that considered sort of a plum assignment when you're with the AP or the Post, or how do you even put yourself in position to be one of the journalists that's sent to cover the Olympics at your respective papers or outlets?
You lobby. You make it very clear to the powers that be, your top sports editor. You know, used to be Terry Taylor, the global sports editor for AP. Now it's Michael Geruso. So yeah, definitely made it clear. Terry told me once that I did Atlanta and then I got the NFL, so I was rather busy. But I kept pushing. It's like, Olympics. It's the world stage. And Terry said, I don't know if this is going to help or hurt, but I almost took you in '08 to Beijing, but wasn't sure, how we were going to handle the Titans without, if you were out for that long, because, it's almost a month. The games go for nearly 3 weeks, and with travel, it's almost a month's commitment. And that year, it actually worked out well. The Titans started 10-0, went 13-3, so probably was good I didn't go, but yeah, you lobby and you make it very clear. I'll do field hockey, whatever you need me to do, I will do. I want to go.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. I lobbied. The Olympics is the best assignment that any of us get in our careers, I feel like. And everybody wants to do it, and there's only so many spots, and so at the Post, we tend to rotate people in and out, and I've been in and I've been out. And but, the travel is cool. I mean, at this point in our careers, I mean, any more travel is just kind of a nuisance that I'll be fine if I never see Tampa again or Cleveland. But, to go to Beijing or Rio or Sochi, Russia, for me, I mean, it's just once-in-a-lifetime type of things. And then on top of that, being part of a team is unique and fun in our business. We're very much lone wolves out there in our jobs 98% of the time. You're writing on your own, you're reporting on your own, you're making the phone calls, you're turning in a story, and you move on to the next one, and it's a solitary pursuit. But in an Olympics, you're very much part of a team, where at the Post we would have like 8 or 9 writers at an Olympics, and you're huddling the night before to go over assignments for the next day and how we're going to cover everything, and then something breaks and you're jumping on it, and we want to beat the New York Times and we want to beat USA Today, and we're never going to beat the AP, but
we do try.
And then I also feel like it's the hardest assignment and the most physically and mentally taxing assignment. It's 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks of 15-hour days, no days off. But even that, I like really embrace, because how often in our jobs are we really physically or mentally taxed? We're sitting in a chair, we're writing about a game, or you come away from an Olympics at the end of it and you feel like, man, I really I really did something. You know, I feel good about being taxed like that. So.
And what kind of preparation goes into, I mean, before those 2.5 or 3 weeks, I'm sure you're maybe studying up on a sport that you've never covered before, or certain athletes that you expect to be the centerpieces of your stories. What's the preparation process like?
I mean, it certainly varies. I mean, you know, you have, like at the Post when we have 8 or 9 people, and at the AP I'm sure you have somebody who's assigned to each sport and know what they're going to be covering. We also have wild card reporters, which I was at one point in Beijing in '08, where you were covering whatever was hot the next day, and you didn't know what it was going to be till the night before, and you're trying to take a crash course on women's weightlifting or whatever to get up to speed for the next day. But I know that in '16 I was assigned to Katie Ledecky, who is in the Washington area. She grew up in Bethesda, Maryland. So not only did I cover her at the Olympics and write about her every day there, I was assigned to her starting 18 months before Rio. So taking her through the World Championships, which were also in Russia in 2015. I went to that to write about her and gearing up in the run-up to Russia. So for a massive story like that for our readership, it was the same way with Michael Phelps, you know, in '08 and '12. But, you know, you are on the beat for a year or more for a significant athlete like that.
Yeah. How about you, Teresa?
Well, I'm going to use the last one for an example. I got women's hockey, which thankfully I covered the Predators and have since they came to the, you know, started. So that helped, but I hadn't really covered women's hockey. And I got the assignment last summer, and so I had to dive in immediately. And I got lucky. There was the Four Nations Cup, and they had it in Tampa in November. So I covered a Titans game on Sunday, flew to Tampa on, or Orlando on Monday, and then covered the event through Sunday, or Saturday. And just stocked up as much as possible, and then flew back, covered a Titans game on Sunday. Out of that 6-day period in Florida, I ended up getting 10 stories out of that. And nowadays, it's not just enough to do the story. I also had video with almost every single story as well, and so I was able to milk that. But that's where I built the relationships. You know, I'd been emailing, and you know, it's much easier than it was in Atlanta. In Atlanta, the internet, I know this for the younger folks, particularly like Cutler, it's unbelievable to imagine, but the internet was in its very early days, not months or years. And trying to find information about flat water canoe kayak and rowing, which I covered in Atlanta, nearly impossible. But today it's easy. So email, cell phones, it's made the job much easier, but you still have to invest that time. So for several months, yes, I was keeping that on top of my other duties.
Which is every other sport, right? And so, Dave, I know you were also doing some work on Usain Bolt prior.
Yeah.
Is that right? You have a story about features on Usain?
Yeah, you know, in the run-up to an Olympics, you would the most prominent athletes would warrant a major definitive profile. And so in '08, I was assigned the Usain Bolt profile, and so I went to Jamaica, set this thing up through his representatives, and then got in touch with his family. He lives in a small little village in the interior of the island. So I went to Kingston to watch him in the national championships, talked to him a little bit there. I didn't get a lot of access with him, which is why I felt like I needed the family. So I set it up with the family. After I got done in Kingston at the national championships, I hired a driver at my hotel. And the thing about Jamaica, you know, away from the tourist centers was, at that time anyway, there weren't any real addresses. So I couldn't exactly tell the driver where I was going, but the driver was cool. He was like on board with whatever I needed. He's like, we'll find him. So we drive into the mountains. It's about an hour drive, and we know the town, and so we get to the town, and he just starts rolling down the window and asking people, you know, where's Bolt live? And I wouldn't even attempt to do a Jamaican accent, but basically, where does Bolt live? And they would say, oh yeah, you know, you go up here, you make a right at the church, and then a left at the cow pasture, and blah, blah, and it was all dirt roads. And so we drive for a little while, and we start approaching this place, and all I can see is fire. An entire field, it looks like, is on fire, and it's just. And I'm like, is this it? He's like, this is what they said. And so we kind of pull over, and the fire is burning up this field. and all of a sudden 3 kids come up a little pathway holding machetes. And I'm like, what have I gotten myself into? You know, this is like some kind of apocalyptic hellscape here. And come to find out, you may have guessed this by now, it was sugarcane harvest. So to harvest the sugarcane, you burn the field so that I guess it's easier to hack with a machete. So that's just what you do when you're sugar farmers. So they're in the middle of harvesting the sugarcane at the Bolt family farm, I guess. And so they lead me down this path through the fires and everything, and there's his grandma, Bolt's grandma, is out there with a machete hacking at sugarcane, and they all stop for a little while, but they say, you know, we have to finish this. So I stand there and like watch them for like an hour, and then we go in the house and we talk and we visit with the family. So that's my Usain Bolt profile story.
So before I come back to you, Teresa, like when you've spent a year and a half, you know, following Katie Ledecky even before the Olympics, or you go to Jamaica to do this story on Usain Bolt, when you finally get to the Olympics, do you actually find yourself with somewhat of a rooting interest for these people, whereas a journalist, you're not rooting for the teams that you're covering? Or?
I guess I guess I'd be lying if you didn't, you know, develop some sort of affinity for them as you get to know them or whatever. But I will say that without a doubt, I root for the story. And you know, if that means Usain Bolt getting upset in Beijing, or Katie Ledecky losing for the first time ever, and you know, I would have been fine with that, because you root for this. That's a great story. If Katie Ledecky's unbeaten and sort of like chokes in the Olympics, or if Usain Bolt pulls up a hamstring or something, you know. But it's a better story when they set world records, you know, and that's what Bolt did, and that's what Katie Ledecky did. I mean, and that elevates the story to a great level that, you know, makes for some great writing. So you root for that.
And to follow up, going into women's hockey in Korea, Canada had won, you know, U.S. won the very first women's gold medal in '98. Canada had just won them ever since. You know, U.S. was beating them at World Championships, Four Nation Cups, you know, all these other tournaments. But let's face it, you know, the Olympics are the time that, you know, many sports get their attention. And so, yes, I was hoping that the U.S. would win. Why? Because that would be the better story. If Canada won yet again, it'd be like, well, yeah, U.S. just can't do it, and people wouldn't pay as much attention. Yeah. U.S. winning, that made it a much better story. And yes, I had spent much more time writing about the U.S., talking to the U.S., and was more familiar with their side of the story, but it was a much better story. And then they topped it, going to overtime and then a shootout. And then the fun part about that, I got to share this. When I was in Tampa and talking to them, the Lamoureux sisters were not made available. They didn't play in any of the Four Nation Cup games. And so I had to go back there before catching my flight on Saturday, and it's like, I need to talk to the twin sisters, to the Lambs. You know, I need them for my stories. So I finally, they pull them out, and I get them, and I interview them, and I shoot some video, and I ended up doing a story just on them before the games. And it kind of felt like maybe they were the coach was trying to get a lot of youth onto this team, and it's like, are they going to get shoved? Are they going to make the roster, period? Well, they make the roster, and then Monique ties it up late in regulation, and then Jocelyn is the one who scored the winning goal in the shootout. And it's like, oh baby, that's gold. It's like, it was easy to write because it was just laid out in front of me.
Yeah.
And what do you all notice about the press corps or the broadcast journalists from other countries? Like, is there a dramatic difference between the way the American press is and the other countries? What are some stories about that?
Cheering in the press box, which
man,
you're not supposed to do. There's a lot of that.
I mean, it goes beyond cheering, right? I mean, it's like full-fledged, like party, like, oh my God, crying, weeping if your country wins, and to us it's just like, oh wow, okay, that's interesting, you know.
What country?
Well, I mean, I think it's just about universal outside of the U.S. Maybe Canada is like us, but everybody else roots for their athletes. I mean, seriously, I've seen weeping from the journalists. I also had the experience in 2014 of my assignment then was Alex Ovechkin and the Russian hockey team. So I was essentially the Russian hockey team beat writer, because Alex Ovechkin obviously is so massively important for Washington, and he was returning to Russia for the Olympics and was you know, the hometown star. And so I was assigned to cover him and the Russian team, and I sort of got adopted by the Russian press corps. You know, I was showing up to every practice, and the PR guys knew me, and they would loop me in on the emails, and I would have to go get it translated, and they would pat me on the back, hey, Dave's here, and I became like one of their beat crew, and I sort of became a little bit like, oh my God, I'm like rooting for Russia, you know, like so. Yeah, so you can get swept up in it, I suppose.
Well, I'm thinking back to the preliminary games is where I saw it the most. You know, in the hockey, they had a unified team for Korea, and you know that was just an amazing thing because you know, huge. I mean, this team had no chance. The South Korean team was like ranked 22nd in the world, and you know the North Koreans. You know, it was almost like, you know, please take some of our best players and work them in, but that feel, and from the journalists, there was, you know, particularly that very first game when the, you know, you had the Kim Jong-un's sister was there, and you know the leaders of South Korea were there, and you know there was an absolute feel in that building for that game of just a source of national pride, and you could feel that from the reporters. So that was just an amazing moment.
I do think, honestly, part of the excitement of the other countries in winning is anti-Americanism in a sense. You feel that for sure at an Olympics, and part of why they're so excited is beating the U.S. You know, they hate us for the most part. So
I haven't seen that because I covered women's basketball in Rio, and that team just doesn't lose.
They win by 40 every game.
Exactly. And same with the hockey.
So being there for the AP, are you basically, Teresa Walker is the provider of news and scores and results to the entire world? Is that the way you sort of approach your job, is that it's going to come first from you? Especially with TV maybe being delayed in different time zones?
Oh, absolutely. And Korea is a perfect example because of the time difference. The gold medal game ended, I think, 2:30, 3 o'clock local time in the morning. Now, I've talked to people who stayed up, but it never matters. A game can start at 11 a.m., 11 p.m. As soon as that game ends, my responsibilities don't end. We have to have a story filed within, you know, 20 minutes max of a game ending. And as soon as it goes zeros, my goal is to have the final score in there. I want to be punching the button to send it to my editor so that we can get it out like that. Our goal is to be the very first one out there all the time. When in Vancouver and London, I sent the news alerts, you know, up to 94 characters, letting the world know who won each gold medal in each event. And yeah, we were monitoring that to see if we beat people and by how much, because it's still competitive. We want to be the first one out there, and we are serving the world. Now, before the gold medals and the medal rounds, we are focusing on the U.S. because that's where so many of our customers, you know, are based, and people want to read about the Americans.
And Dave, I know, just being Facebook friends, that you have your busy day, but then you have pretty busy nights at the Olympics too. It seems like you have fun when you're in the countries too.
You do. I mean, that's part of the. I don't know. I mean, you know, we can be pretty cynical, and the whole notion of the world coming together over the Olympics and the rah-rah, you know, it can, you know, it's not true because it's a money grab. The IOC, the Olympics, is first and foremost a money grab. But you can find yourself in some really cool situations in a bar full of drunken Lithuanians and Swedes and Venezuelans and some, you know, some song will come on, Hey Jude comes on the sound system, and everybody is singing na 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 na, and it's just, you know, but I think what Andrew is referencing is that I did in Sochi come to be gain a small measure of fame in the Olympic Village as the opera karaoke guy, because I did study. I studied as an opera singer at Vanderbilt, and I haven't really done anything with it, but I can still pull it out, you know, from time to time and just freak people out. So we were in a karaoke wine bar in Russia, and every night, you know, I would go there and put my name in the queue and then ask for like "O Sole Mio" or something like that, and then the guy would be like, "Really?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So and then I would start singing, and you know, it definitely turned some heads and freaked some people out. It wound up on the internet too. I think you could probably find it somewhere on YouTube. But I would be carried back there every night by various people. You got to go do that again. This guy didn't see it, and so that was my claim to fame in Sochi.
You had a similar event with Danny Werfel when he won the Heisman Trophy, didn't you?
That's true. I was covering the University of Florida football, and the night Danny Werfel won the Heisman, all the other writers coerced me through bourbon to go into the room where Danny and his family were sitting there with the Heisman Trophy and sing "Oh Danny Boy" to him. So of course, after a couple of bourbons, I did it, and Danny was like blown away. The Heisman is sitting right there on the table, and he looks around at us and said, "Man, it took me all the way till senior year to find any talent in you guys." So, yeah. Yeah, it's a useful tool. It's a useful tool to pull out. I usually only do it now to punish my kids, but every now and then it serves a use.
Teresa, what's the range of like just the accommodations? Are you guys, is there like a press village that's similar to the Olympic Village where the athletes are? Or where do you stay in these countries when you're there?
I've had the range. In Atlanta, they had me at a luxury Hilton or Hyatt hotel on Lake Lanier. There was a big pool, and you know, it overlooked the lake. It was gorgeous. A small hotel room in Vancouver. I had a really nice room in London. Rio and Korea, though, were very different. In Rio, I was out in the western section of Rio. My mom was worried about security. I could not have been safer. Our housing was on a military base, so we were behind, you know, wire, walls, tanks. And you know, that's where they put people who were covering equestrian, field hockey, the preliminary rounds of women's basketball, you know, the motocross, the bike stuff. So we were all out there and could not have been safer. Now, I go in, running water in the bathroom did not really work. The shower did. So I took the other room, and the water worked. It was cold for the entirety of the stay. I had to attach the toilet seat to be able to use it. It was sitting there in a box, so at least they had it. And then halfway through, they locked me out of that room. They said, no, that's not the room you're supposed to be in. You're supposed to be in this much smaller room with this bathroom. And the water did not work in the sink or the toilet in that one. And I was kind of mad because I'd already put the toilet seat on it and it didn't work. So I ended up having to share the bathroom with a photographer who, you know, from London, who they had her. I never hardly saw her because she was running all over Brazil. Now in Korea, I shared. It was not bad. You know, they had everything wrapped in like plastic for the people who were going to move in when we left. But we had a bedroom and a wardrobe and one bathroom that we shared, one TV and a little teeny couch. Well, the bed was a box spring with a piece of cardboard on it and then a sheet. And I had been going to the chiropractor for a few months because my back and hip were not happy, and I see that and I'm like, oh God. Actually, it was not bad. When you're only sleeping 4 hours a night, that worked. So, you know, it made Rio look, you know, it was much better than Rio.
And I remember seeing pictures from Sochi before the Olympics of like dogs running through these hotels. And
there were stray dogs. Yeah, I mean, they had just built this village out of nowhere. It looked like it was like these prefab buildings that probably went up in an hour and were going to come down in an hour when you left. And some of the plumbing was not hooked up. I know that in my place in Sochi, there was no shower curtain in the shower, so I would go and ask for a shower curtain, and it never showed up, and I would just flood the bathroom floor every morning. I'm not going to not take a shower, and the maids, I guess, would clean it up each day. And then finally, I came home one night, and there was a shower curtain in a plastic store-bought container on the bathroom vanity, but there was no bar to hang it on. So I'm like, okay, well, they got me my shower curtain, so now, can you get me a shower bar? And I think that never did actually make it, so I just flooded the bathroom floor every morning. Yeah, I believe the case is you get the organizing committee sends out the housing situation. I believe there's 3 levels that you can choose from based on how much your news organization wants to splurge. There's the low end, the medium, and the high end, and I believe that at the Post we always get the medium one, which can run anywhere from just barely above the bottom to a little bit nicer. So I think that's how it works, but.
Well, in Rio, I know I had colleagues who had housing at hotels at Copacabana Beach. Trust me, it's like, ooh, can I stay here? Because I went back I had one day off in Rio, and I went to see Christ the Redeemer because I'm in Rio. And then I get back to the room, and the door handle fell off to our unit. Thankfully, the key would open the door and unlock it and let us in, but we couldn't. We put it back on, but it just kept falling off.
Yeah, yeah.
So, Dave, you kind of alluded to the Olympics as maybe not quite what we think of the image being and sort of the money-making enterprise that it is.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, you have these great human interest stories of the athletes, but then you've got this Olympic machine. Do you come away from covering the Olympics feeling better about the Olympics as an event that's good for the world every 4 years, or worse about it?
I mean, it's certainly mixed. The great thing about being at an organization like the Post and I'm sure the AP as well is that you are joined at the Olympics with some news side people who we have a South America bureau, and in Beijing we had a Beijing bureau, and in Sochi we had the Moscow bureau came down, and they would write a lot of the society news stories about the impact of the Olympics on the local populace, and it's generally not very pretty. They're moving villages out. They're plowing them over to build an Olympic village, and they're basically destroying communities. So luckily, that is done by our news side people who have been in that country and have known the machinery there. So we get to focus largely on sports, but there's still cases where it bleeds over into the sporting events, and you have to sort of weigh how far to go with a sports story versus a society story. And then we have columnists who are sort of tasked with bridging that. Like Sally Jenkins, someday, if you have a spare hour or two, just go back and read all of Sally Jenkins' columns from Beijing in '08. I mean, just amazing at explaining what the Olympics mean in China, and why it's not the feel-good story that NBC wants you to come away from with. So we all, depending on our job duties, have to sort of decide where we're gonna focus, whether it's news, strictly sports, or some merging of the two.
But it's impossible not to walk into some of these venues. The women's hockey arena that they played all their preliminary games in. I walked into it and I'm like, how long is this going to last? And since then, I've read AP stories that they're like, well, we don't really have a use for this building, and they're already talking about tearing down possibly a building that, they just had competition in February. And if you look at the stories from Rio, they had preliminary women's basketball games. It was kind of like a hangar, an unair-conditioned, unheated kind of hangar that they put in. And some of those facilities in Rio, even months after that, same thing. They're falling into disrepair. They don't really have uses for it. And so, yeah, I've absolutely had those thoughts. And I think we're starting to see, Calgary just had a vote earlier this week where people said, no, we don't want to bid for the Olympics. And, we're seeing more and more cities, pulling out of even thinking about bidding to host future.
Well, I mean, what is 2022 is back in Beijing for a Winter Olympics. 14 years after the Summer Games there, they're having a Winter Olympics in Beijing, and that is basically because no one else bid on it except, I believe, Kazakhstan. Honest to God, there were efforts underway in places like Norway and Sweden, I believe, but they all were voted down with referendums and stuff, and so it wound up being the lesser of two evils, I guess, for the IOC, and they wound up going back to Beijing in 2022, 14 years after a Summer Games.
One last question, then we'll open it up to the audience. But you hear people say that sports and politics shouldn't mix, and then you hear other people say sports and politics are inseparable, and they always have been.
Yeah.
In covering the Olympics, what new light or different shades of light does that shed on this?
Yeah,
team?
I mean, for the athletes, you know, it's a pure. I mean, at least the ones who aren't doping, it's a pure athletic pursuit, and it is the realization of a lifelong dream, and it's everything that you know, NBC makes it out to be. For the individual athletes, it is the purest of sporting events, but it's inseparable from the politics. I mean, having been to Beijing and then Sochi, you could see how, you know, authoritarian regimes treat it as propaganda for their countries and their presidencies, and it can be suffocating in that way. And to me, it's really inseparable, other than at the granular athlete basis.
Absolutely intertwined. Looking whenever Korea was competing in hockey, they had, at almost every game, they had that group of cheerleaders, and if you saw them, they looked like, you know, I mean, they looked like Barbie dolls from Stepfordville. I mean, I have friends who were cameramen, and they were taking pictures with them behind them. Andrew Nellis with the Tennessean, I think, had one, and I mean, they all looked alike. They were all dressed alike. They almost all had the same expression, and you know, the people, they were having the flags. They were giving out the flags. You know, trying to just stir that. And that first night, all the politicians, all the leaders were there. You know, and then they came down to the bench. And all the Koreans came over. They bowed at each other. They were shaking hands. It was completely, you know, it wasn't so much a game that night. It was a complete political statement by that team just being on the ice, and everyone was there for it. So I don't think you can pull them apart.
That's right. Okay. All right. Let's open this up to questions from the audience. What questions do you have for Dave and Teresa? Yes, ma'am.
You talked about doing video, you're writing stories, and you're sending in tape. Are you using your phone?
I sure am. And thankfully I've got one that's now upgraded. I've got much more storage on this, and 1080p. But no, I have a selfie stick that you know, people make fun of, but it allows me to raise it up above to shoot, or shoot it through the cameraman. But yeah, I shoot it on this. I filed a video on Marcus Mariota from yesterday. All shot, edited, you know, the app that I use, it's all on this phone. I only use a tape recorder these days when it's in a podium situation, and I put that up there to get the entirety of an interview or availability, and then I just use this to shoot the sections that I think I might file later.
Do you do that similar, Dave?
I really don't. I guess, do you have videography staff and that,
we are the video.
You are, so I feel lucky.
We have a section that does TV,
yeah.
But yeah, for us, if we're going to get it out in the field, it's us.
Yeah, so I feel very lucky that I don't have to do that, because I would think I would be terrible at videography. So we have videographers who accompany us on a lot of stories, including at the Olympics, and of course still photographers. So I believe I've never shot video, I've been at the Post almost 20 years.
I probably started shooting video Marcus Mariota's rookie year. My boss in August, we were doing a Jameis Winston Mariota story before their regular season opener. My boss said, try to shoot some video. And you know, at that point, we didn't quite have a format laid out. I shot it, I edited it in iMovie, and you know, I asked a colleague to look at it, and she forwarded it to somebody. And well, since then, let's put it this way, that probably helped get me to 2 Super Bowls. And a couple other nice assignments, just because you know, people, my son is a 19-year-old college sophomore, and I had seen him looking at, you know, he's not reading as much as I'd like him to, but YouTube, he's all over that. So it's like, listen, I got to learn how to shoot this and file it, and I use it as a way to help further my storytelling.
Yeah.
David?
In either of your experiences, have you encountered any involvement countries or the kids that are boycotting, or any of the disputes that happened, I think, in Rio in the 4x100, and you had the dispute and how that had to be settled, and they had to change the race and change the order, and especially being in Brazil in that case where they were out of the medal run. Have you had to deal with those?
I can't recall one like that. I mean, there are certainly controversies that pop up within sports, a DQ here that is, you know, a long appeal process. I don't recall ever anything like that, though, or a boycott or anything.
In London, I know we had like women's triathlon, 2 finishers crossed the tape at the same time. And that's when I was doing the news alert, and I'm on the phone with 2 editors over each shoulder, and we're trying to figure out who the winner was. And that took way too long for my taste, especially with Terry Taylor right there over my shoulder. It's like I was a little nervous. But not that I've run into. I will say this: we're talking about politics. It's such a huge stage. It reminded me in Rio. I had the men's marathon on the final day. And, you know, guy wins. I knew he was going to be the winner at mile 18. I've got that story. The guy who finished second, as he ran across the finish line, he did this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he was from, I think it was Ethiopia, and thankfully, AP being worldwide, one of my colleagues in Africa got a note to our Olympic desk that was a protest against the government, and, you know, it could get him killed if he comes back. And let's put it this way, that I ended up having a whole other story to write because of that. And I felt bad for the gold medal winner. He won silver and bronze, finally gets gold, and all the questions after the race were about this poor guy and, you know, what was he going to do now and his protest.
Dave, in Rio, you ended up covering the controversy of a different kind, I guess, Ryan Lochte's
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I was the swimming guy, you know, so even though I was more focused on Katie Ledecky, I was covering the entire swimming program, and yeah, the second half of the Olympics, after the swimming ended, I was supposed to be sort of floating around to different sports and filling in for our coverage on different sports day to day, but wound up covering the Ryan Lochte story, which was really ugly on a number of levels, you know. Yeah, I mean, essentially he took out he and another veteran swimmer took out a couple of young guys, and they went on a night on the town, got drunk and trashed a gas station at a bathroom at a gas station, and then got in trouble for it, and the owners called the police and security, and so Ryan Lochte and his friends, you know, created this concocted this fake story of how they were held up, and then they were held up by random people, and then it changed that we were held up by rogue cops, and, you know, finally the story came to light, as it always does, but it was a week-long story. You know, if you'll remember, you know, eventually he went on the Today Show at the very end of the Olympics and admitted that he had made it up. And then some of the Olympians had trouble getting out of the country because they pulled their passports, and you know, it was, I mean, it was a 7 to 10 day story that sort of dominated the second half of the Olympics from a news perspective, and certainly from my perspective.
Yes, sir.
I was in Atlanta during the Olympics, and I was writing for the Atlanta Bulletin newspaper.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you remember when they displayed the Civil War on the stadium floor, grayish color, cloudish, like I'm not sure what it was they was using, smoke or whatever, but they displayed the Civil War during the Olympics, and I was wondering if
was that during the opening ceremony?
I'm not sure what.
You were in Atlanta. I was
in
not.
Atlanta, but I was kind of traveling back and forth from the news conference, so I actually missed watching the opening ceremonies. Rowing had me getting up at 5 in the morning so I could be out at the lake. So. Not too surprising, though, if that happened being in Atlanta, though.
Maybe I'll.
Quite interesting. I got a chance to travel a lot with the Canadian Olympic team. It was quite an experience.
Yeah.
do you typically go to the opening or closing ceremonies or in these?
We usually get like 2 seats for the post, and our tradition is that one person goes who's covering it, and the second person we rotate in sort of the rookie on the team who gets to go. So I got to go in 2008 in Beijing, but I have not. Yes, and I have not been since.
I got to go to the closing ceremony in Vancouver, and that was awesome because I like Michael Bublé, and they had Nickelback. I know that's not very popular, but and Avril Lavigne, and I still haven't gotten anyone to tell me if they bleeped the word from her song on the national telecast. But and then I got to go to the opening in London, and the tough thing is they don't tell you how far in advance you have to be there. We had to be in the seats a couple of hours before this gets started. And the athletes are standing outside the arena, and they have to walk. So, that was awesome. Well, the next summer, the Memphis Grizzlies reached the Western Finals, and they lose to the Spurs. And I'm sitting outside in the arena, and I'm writing up my wrap up of the Grizzlies. And Marc Gasol comes out, and he's got a big load he's taken to his car at the end of the season. And I had to ask him because he and his brother played for Spain in London. And his brother Pau carried the Spanish flag in, and I was looking because I knew TV wanted to have the brothers together. Well, and I finally found Marc. He was at the end of it, and so I couldn't resist. I said, "So, did they push you to be up there with him?" And he says, "Oh, yes, they did." And I said, "And?" He goes, "There's no way I was going to be up there with him." So that was a fun little twist that we were both there. He had a much better seat, though. But I actually had to sit, and he was kind of exhausted. So when you hear them say, athletes aren't taking part, part of it is competition schedule, but they're not getting much of benefit from being Olympians. I mean, if you're there, you're walking, and then you're standing, waiting until they announce your country, and you get to walk in, and then you're standing down on the track. So every time I listen to something and they're kind of criticizing the athletes, it's like, dude, that's a long time to be standing on your feet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, sir.
Teresa, what's the process of filing a story in 20 minutes, mechanically and mentally? I mean, I'm sitting here. How the heck do you do such a thing?
Writing through the game, and for U.S. Canada, I had 2 screens going. I had the U.S. winning, I had Canada winning, because and you build it through the game. And once they get to the overtime and then shootout, I'm literally watching and writing at the same time. Somebody who was monitoring the game back in our bureau in Pyeongchang, and I was in Gangneung on the coast, messaged and said, right before Megan Augusta took the final shot for Canada, that the U.S. goalie was smiling. So it's like I work that detail in, and so you're just building it both. And then as soon as the final happens, I look up, get a little bit of color, try to throw that in, but then speed. So I put in the final score. Being a shootout at that point, I already knew it was going to be this and that, so I had that ready. And then I put in the how things went, put in the sentence, and I leave little spaces. And then it's like read it, spell check it, and send it. And the editor who was filing it, he was sitting beside me. I think he was back in the other, I can't even remember where he was. And he handles it and sends it off. And then I run downstairs to the mix zone, which is its own wonderful creation.
Yeah. Mix
zone, when I go to the Titans after the game, I get to go in the locker room. Grizzlies, same thing. Vanderbilt, we have a post-game interview room. Well, mix zones at the Olympics, it's a rope, and they walk the athletes and the coaches through, and you have blocked off spots. So AP has a spot that we share with, I think, Reuters and AFP, and Post usually has a section set off, and you have to try to get the PR people to grab them, but then sometimes you have to, hey, come over here, and there's people speaking in all sorts of languages, and that is an experience. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
And then rush back upstairs with the quotes, transcribe, and try to get everything out. And ideally, the final story should be out an hour or so after the game ended.
Yes.
I have a question for Dave. So, regarding the Lochte story, when you were put on that, you were sort of taken away from the opportunity to explore other sporting events.
Yeah.
Really covered a much greater part of the Olympics, just an individual athlete. that make you feel in the sense that were you happy to come as an individual?
No, I was really bummed, honestly. I mean, I wanted to experience the rest of the Olympics and you know, get out and cover something, you know, that I'll never cover again in my life. You know, go cover the gold medal fencing match or whatever. And I was a little bit bummed to be chained to a desk for the rest of the Olympics covering that story and working the phones and coordinating with our Rio bureau chief, who was handling the majority of the police reporting. But yeah, it was a bummer. I won't lie. It was also, you knew it was a very important story. So I mean, your news antenna goes up, and you're into it. And I wanted to, we wanted to own that story. And so I didn't let it affect the job, but deep down I was kind of bummed. Yeah.
You could have been with me at a men's marathon at last day.
Yeah, true.
Dr. J. Robert Bradley is one of the singing sons of Tennessee, and his name was on the Coat of 3 Stars, and he was scheduled to be one of the singers in Brazil Olympics, but something happened with the president there, and something was going on there, and he was not able to.
Huh. Wow, I didn't know that.
Chris?
So I assume, you're in tennis up all the time, you're always making observations, even if you're attending the opening or closing ceremonies for fun. Do you have examples of stories that you passed on to colleagues because you observed something that wasn't something that you would need to write about, but something that you thought someone else in your organization would be interested in?
That's an interesting question. I'm sure there is. I mean, I know that, stories will crop up. I mean, one time I believe this was in Sochi, I wound up doing a story that kind of materialized out of nowhere because I had started to notice that there were a number of athletes winning medals for countries for which they were not natives, that they had been naturalized somehow. There was a rich European country, a small, I can't even remember which one, but that would recruit like marathoners and distance runners from African countries, just like the NCAA would recruit athletes to come run for their country just for the prestige of having a medal winner. And so they would get them naturalized. I wish I could remember the name, but I pulled all these together into a big story about what we called international free agency, and there were tons of examples of there were rich Americans who would go ski for a tiny Caribbean island nation just to be able to go to the Olympics because they would never make the U.S. ski team. And there were all these examples, and it became a really fascinating story that did really well, and I believe went on A1 of the Washington Post. And that was one where, like, I had colleagues feeding me examples from their sports and their experiences, so it was very much collaborative.
For me in Rio, I was covering the last game of the day in a 4-game day, and started hearing that one of the media buses had been shot at. And I was busy covering my game and wrapping that up, so I messaged our bureau in Rio and I said, hey, we're hearing something here, and they followed up on the story, and sure enough, it was one of the, I could tell later when I had to travel into Rio a couple days later, there was actually a military bus or, big truck or tank sitting there on the spot where there had been the shot. And there was a lot of speculation after that. It's like, oh, that wasn't a shot. Somebody threw a rock. Well, there was a former military person who was on the bus, and she completely identified it almost to the caliber. She said it was a weapon.
Yeah.
Cutler.
Not sure if either of you have covered a feature World Cup as well, but do you see any kind of similarities and differences between covering an Olympics and covering a World Cup? In the way that you kind of experience the stories and just kind of
yeah.
the global stage?
I haven't, but I have spoken to colleagues who have done both, and I think it is very similar. It's another organization rife with corruption and graft, but it's also has the same same pomp, and ceremony, and it's a massive global production that I think has many of the same atmosphere as an Olympics.
Mix zones are the same.
Yeah.
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 Yes, Scott. Can you guys talk a little bit about the scope of the media operation? You've talked about, you've referenced it a little bit, but it sounds like a small city almost.
Mm-hmm.
And with the AP in particular, is it nimble? Is it chaotic? Is there a good chain of command? How does it work?
I think there is, because for AP, and when you go to the main media center at any of the games, there's the MPC, main press center, and there's general work areas, and then there's the organizations that have their own little offices, and AP has its own office at each one. And then you've got your techs out in the field marking off your spots in the venues so that you can hardwire and plug in an Ethernet cord, and then there's the bus schedule. The best thing may be the bus app schedule, so that you can I'm at this venue, I need to be at this venue, where's the bus? You can click on that now.
Yeah.
So you can plan your day around the buses, and then you shoot. The media village has its own little 24-hour store. Dining halls. It's literally its own little army.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for the Post, we're considered. I mean, we're a large organization, but there are much larger ones. How many writers would you guys have or journalists? We would have like 9 or 10 probably.
I think the number for Korea, photographers and everything, I think I remember around 180.
Yeah, so 180 people with one organization. I mean, imagine,
And that was the Winter Games, which is small.
Right. Imagine, trying to run that operation and get everything. And you essentially, AP covers every single event, right? I mean, that's part of the gig.
Yeah, we've got somebody at everything.
So we have to make choices, because we have 8 or 9 people, maybe 10, including an editor or a videographer, and so there are things we're not going to get to, but sometimes you have to get there on the fly because something is happening that I'm trying to remember an example of that. Who was the Greco-Roman wrestler who came out of nowhere to win gold medal for the U.S. Back in
I see gold.
Athens or something.
Okay, I'm thinking.
Anyway,
London.
You would have to hustle over there because, stories happen away. You make choices and sometimes you lose. We try to cover it. I think I said earlier that with 8 or 9 writers, like we had some who were assigned to the major sports, gymnastics, track, swimming, and then a couple of columnists, and then 2 or 3 people who are like floaters, who are sort of supposed to find the best story of each day and cover that or jump onto something else. So those would be the people who have to sort of change on the fly. Yeah.
What's your suitcase like when you come back? Like, are you bringing back T-shirts for all your kids and spouses, or like, do you have a favorite item that you've ever brought back from an Olympics, just personally?
Oh.
I like to get one of the mascots for my niece. So I've gotten one from the last 3 games. I've got something for my son, and it's like he's such a hockey kid now that it's like, unless I can get something hockey-wise. So I bring back a few things, but in Korea it was tough to get to the store, and then when you got to the store, it was jam-packed. Right.
Yeah, I brought home some chocolate gold medals, so they were big chocolate circles in a gold wrapping thing with a ribbon around it, and I have 2 kids, and that went a long way for me. It didn't necessarily say, well, it did, it had stamped on it Sochi Olympics or something, but so that made me probably got me further than any kind of T-shirt would have. That was probably I
know you kind of touched on it before, but with the way Calgary just rejected any attempt at bidding for the 2026 Olympics, I mean, there's only 2 host cities potentially left. Do you feel like we're getting close to an era where people are more wary of hosting these games, and into a sense where the IOC could be in kind of a crisis soon, come 2030 or 2032?
Well, it's mixed, right? Because that like 2022, as I said, they were left basically with Beijing or again or Kazakhstan, but yet 2024 had very vibrant bidding from Paris and LA, and then even in America, LA won out over Washington and another city as well. And so cities are still bidding, but but I think that the examples of Sochi, which were $50 billion, and Rio, where it devastated the population and all the, I think that has an effect, and you are seeing that. So I think you may be left with sort of some Western super cities that are left to bid for games like these, and the winter may be worse off, because obviously it has to be in a certain kind of climate, a certain type of geographical region with mountains, and so that may be a bigger problem going forward than summer games.
If hypothetically the world built a couple of permanent bases,
right? That's been proposed.
Would they lose their cash flow for their graft?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. It makes a lot of sense, right? To have almost like the British Open courses, where it rotates among six or eight courses in Scotland and England. To have some sort of permanent or semi-permanent rotation of Olympic cities, but then that would, destroy the whole what the IOC is predicated upon, right? So the bidding process, and so I don't see that happening anytime soon.
It seems like the only thing that might change things is just the lack of cities rushing to bid. If those go away, then they may have no choice. I mean, that's why they're even discussing now the idea of having, certain cities that end up rotating.
Yeah, it's funny. You can use your brain and see what is done for all these other cities and some of the problems that Athens has had since the Olympics. Certainly Rio. I'm sure I'm leaving out other examples, but that where it's been an economic, it's just crushed them, the cities economically. So you can know all that in your mind, and yet still get swept up in, oh my God, what if we had an Olympics in our city? And all it takes is one motivated city like that who thinks that we can solve this, and then it perpetuates it, So, I mean, LA and Paris made substantial bids for 2024, and the IOC gave them both one. So, where Paris in 2024 and LA in 2028, I mean, those are, big cities that knew all the history and yet still went forward with bids. So maybe they know something we don't, or maybe they just got swept up in the whole Olympic ideal.
Yes, sir.
I'm a sports fanatic. You have to tell me when Los Angeles last had the Olympics.
84.
That's what my memory said. I know what happened immediately after the award, because my department, which I worked for in the city of LA, was heavily impacted by it. If you like the story, I'll be willing to tell it, but it doesn't have anything to do with sports. It's all politics.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
You would like to hear? I'll tell it.
All right. Well, let's go to this young man for the last question, then we can gather informally and we can hear your story. Yes, sir.
So, do you think that the reason certain cities get swept up with this, with the idea of the Olympics, is due to the heavy and glamorous media coverage during the Olympics and the lack of it after?
How do you mean that now?
Because during the Olympics, there's so much media coverage, especially in the United States, constantly reporting on individual athletes and stories. But do you think there is sufficient media coverage
of the aftermath? No, I don't think there is sufficient. I mean, for the most part, you go into one of these Olympics, at the end of it, you go back home and you're done with it, and then you're moving on to football season in August, or hockey season or whatever, and basketball season in February. But those people have to live with it and the consequences for the rest of their lives. And I mean, there are good stories that are done in the aftermath, and there are like we have, like I said, the foreign bureaus who have written extensively about Rio in the aftermath of the Olympics, and Sochi for that matter, but you know, there's not enough of it. It is like a spigot that shuts off at the end of the Olympics and everybody leaves and that's the end of it. But it impacts people's lives, no question about it. Especially from my experience, Rio was an example of, you know, an Olympics that I think destroyed a local economy and a sizable chunk of the population.
Well, and imagine this. The reason we pay attention to the Olympics so much is it's impossible to ignore. You know, the volume's cranked up to 11. You've got NBC is, you know, showing so many highlights. They're all over their cable channels. You know, and there's, you know, a couple thousand to 3,000 media from around the world there with their, you know, all the lights, everything's focused on them. Then we all go home. You know, the cameras aren't there, and, you know, AP has, you know, our writers in South Korea have been covering what's going on in the aftermath. I mean, shoot, where they had some of the mountain events, you know, they mowed down, you know, virgin forests to put ski runs through there and to try to build a town, and relocated people, and, you know, and now they're trying to figure out, well, that didn't work, maybe we'll just replant those. It's not going to be the ski town we thought it would be. And, you know, so we're writing those stories, but everybody's gone back to everything else, and, you know, the speakers went away, you know, to help amplify the message.
Sounds like as Nashville continues to grow, like it should not be a goal of ours to host the Summer Olympics someday.
I wouldn't think so. I mean, what ends up happening is that these bids, I think, are put together by economic development types who see it as an opportunity to build new, you know, infrastructure, new housing, neighborhoods, entire villages, and see it as a money-making operation for them. So I would be, yeah, I mean, I think the literature out there is plentiful, and it's almost uniformly negative about the impacts of Olympics on communities.
We've got two of these events in the spring semester. One is a man who helped Atlanta win the bid and has helped other cities win Olympic bids, and I'm sure he'll have sort of a different point of view on that. And then we have people who were involved in the Rio, have written about the devastating effects of the Rio Olympics, so I know we're going to agree with everything you're saying here. But
well, in the Atlanta, wasn't it true that in Atlanta, part of the deal that was cut in Atlanta is a lot of the facilities that were built were then pledged and donated to colleges and nonprofits. And so if you think of Georgia Tech, for example, which from their athletic program never had a swimming program, they got that Olympic pool, and it actually allowed them to start offering swimming as part of their varsity sports. But many of the historical black colleges got some of those facilities, and that was part of the whole plan for Atlanta. That some of these buildings, some of these facilities would go to nonprofits and colleges.
Yeah, I don't mean to paint there are certainly good things that come out of every Olympics, and Atlanta's a great example. You know, all of the stadiums were converted. I mean, the Turner Field where the Braves played was the Olympic Stadium.
And they moved out 2 years ago.
And then they moved out of there. But, you know, there are good things that come out of it. I think that maybe in some, like in Brazil, I'm not sure I could name you anything good that came out of that Olympics in terms of serving the people. Atlanta, I think, is maybe a really good exception.
Was the Brazil one, I mean, part and parcel, with the exception of having, you know, Mexico City and Cincinnati, to finally go into South America?
That was, I think, absolutely.
Yeah. You know, because I remember being in South Africa when South Africa thought they were going to get the, I still got the hat that has South Africa, and they didn't get the Olympics, and so the thought of it is, will you not have an Olympics on the African continent?
Right. Well, I think it's very important to do that. I mean, I think it's that should be next, absolutely.
But like Brazil, none of those countries have an infrastructure.
Right, they couldn't. Right.
Devastating.
Exactly.
And some of the venues that they had in London ideally were supposed to be then dismantled and taken to Rio to help deal with and cut some of the costs, and it still didn't cut enough of the costs as it was.
Yeah.
Sir, you had one last question.
Yes. Kind of hitchhike off of what David talked about. In your view, as we bring all these countries together for the Olympics, do you see any type of one-on-one where each one teaches one that it brings the world a little bit closer together? Example, your involvement with the Russian counterparts.
Yeah.
I've been blessed to have a player on the Olympics team from Angola, and in the Olympics in Athens and in Beijing, and I was involved with it, and I saw a great deal of respect between countries and athletes.
Oh, that absolutely happens. Absolutely. I mean, those are some of the best. I mean, athletes are like everyone else. There's going to be some who embrace that experience and see it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get to know other cultures and meet friends all over the world. And some are just going to be, this is just a pain in my butt. I have to go do, this is what I do, so I have to go to this country and compete and then get the heck back home as quick as I can. So the athletes who I love talking to embrace the whole experience and come away with new friends and experience the entirety of the Olympics and don't just sit in their room and wait for their next event and then get on the next plane out. Those are the athletes that I want to talk to.
Do we need more positivism like that in the world that we live in today?
Sure. No, but I do think that the Olympics is covered in a way that's primarily about that. Certainly the way NBC does it, and a lot of us, we tend to. We're interested in the numbers and the clicks, right? So if NBC is doing a story on something that's taken off and going viral or whatever, we want to jump on that story as well. And those are mainly positive stories. I think the majority of Olympic coverage is positive.
With the exception of Ryan Lochte and Rio.
Correct.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. Dave, thanks for coming from DC. Teresa, I know you're covering a million different events every day, so thanks for taking time to do this. Our next event is 2 weeks from today, November 29th. Alice Randall, who's a writer-in-residence here at Vanderbilt and also a songwriter and just an amazing woman, has taken on the subject of flags and anthems, and she's done a lot of research on lyrics to various countries' national anthems and who wrote them and what the designs on different countries' flags represent and some hidden stories there. It's going to be really interesting. We'll be back over at McGugin at the athletic department for that one, 11:30 on the 29th.
Awesome. Thank you.